Good afternoon, everybody. We'll get started shortly. Okay, do we have quorum?
I'm just checking.
No, I'm in no hurry.
Yes, we have a quorum.
Yes. Excellent.
Yeah,
Okay,
just confirming the quorum right now.
but we have somebody in the chair seat.
Oh,
Presumptive.
Okay.
no, I didn't realize we were doing that. So go ahead, Tom. I'll let you continue. I'll just hang back.
Well, I thank you. So apparently we've been called to order, and the first item of business is the election of chair. And we'll take nominations from the floor for chair for 2025.
I'll nominate Mark Baker.
Mark Baker, would you accept that nomination?
Yes, I will.
Thank you very much. Any further nominations for chair? I see some heads shaking, no hands up. Hearing none, we'll declare Mark Baker elected as chair for 2025 and vice chair. Anyone interested in being nominated for vice chair?
I would like to elect Sean Smythe for vice chair, please.
Sean Smythe, you've been nominated for vice chair. Would you accept that?
I accept.
Well, thank you. Any further nominations for vice chair? Seeing none, we'll declare Director Smythe, alternate Director Smythe, elected as vice chair. Thank you very much. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Adoption of agenda. We have the agenda for February sorry, thank you. A second.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Petition and delegations. We will start off with, I've got a series,
I think Aaron, Leslie.
Aaron, Leslie, and Paula. Please.
Thank you very much. So just as background, this presentation is in response to a letter that we received to our Chief Forester's office, Shane Berg. We thought it would make sense to have a local representative group here to answer some of your questions once we've done our presentation. So just to get going, I'd like to introduce my colleagues. I have Erin Moore. She's a forest timber supply analyst, and Leslie Fettis, Director of Strategic Initiatives. And I am Paula Mackay. I'm the Acting District Manager for the Campbell River Natural Resource District. Thanks for having us. All right, so just to give a little bit of context for the coast area, forestry has obviously been very important to the economic driver in the coastal area for decades, particularly in remote rural communities. And historically, land use decisions and planning have not meaningfully involved Indigenous nations. So we're seeing a little bit of a shift in that regard. Old growth forest management in the coast has been a focus of public and non-government organizations and First Nation interests for decades. And an old growth strategic review was conducted, and the report, A New Forest or Old Forest, was released in 2020. As we know, annual allowable cut levels and harvest levels have been declining on the coast as harvest is shifting between second growth forests and more inaccessible parts of the land base. So just to provide a little bit of the Strathcona Regional District context, as we mentioned, there's an increasing Indigenous participation and leadership in the forest sector. We see that with some partnerships between Western Forest Products and First Nations. We also see that with, some nations purchasing some volume that was previously held by Interfor. And so we also are seeing more public interest in forest management. We see that through, our district office receives, community inquiries and comments around how the forests are being managed. And we're kind of seeing an increase in that. And we've noticed in this area, so the Campbell River area specifically, there's a significant difference in timber types across the Strathcona Regional District, with second growth mostly on the east coast, Douglas fir, and then on the west coast, hemlock and balsam is the main forestry components there. So we also have the legacy of the Forest Island Land Use Plan. So for forestry policy, we've seen some kind of recent intentions and changes in policy. So the forest policy intentions paper was released in 2021. And that intentions paper kind of led to some changes to our Forest Act and the Forest and Range Practices Act. This includes, we have a special purpose area and compensation framework to allow different holders of tenure to operate in the land base. And we've seen some changes around forest landscape planning and forest operations planning. So a different shift in how the forests are being managed. And we're seeing some more discretion with how we're approving the cutting authorities on the land base. So as far as old growth management, in response to one of the recommendations in the report I mentioned, recommendation number 6, which is immediate response to ecosystems at very high risk, the old growth strategic review and the province struck a panel called the TAP panel to identify areas of at-risk old growth in ecosystems and prioritize any areas for temporary deferral. So we certainly see that one of the number one recommendation anyways was involving Indigenous partners in how we're managing. So the TAP areas were reviewed by First Nations and some areas were voluntarily deferred by industry. And that's kind of the context where we're at right now with where those TAP polygons are at. And we've had an overwhelming response from nations that have been, it's been based on territorial discussions that recognize the full suite of Indigenous values and on the land base. Long-term management of old growth is primarily going to be addressed through landscape or forest landscape planning, which our district here in the area are undergoing 2 forest landscape planning projects. And that leads me to just a slide. I wanted to show folks where we have some forest landscape planning projects. So we've got, I think it touches a little bit of Strathcona District in the Namgis, the TFL 37 pilot project. It's a forest landscape planning project that is nearing completion. We also have the West Central Vancouver Island project. It's the polygon in kind of the purple we can see here. And then we have Sunshine Coast Forest Landscape Planning Project as well. It's a pilot, and that one's, I think it's nearing completion as well, but maybe not as far as long as TFL 37. And then we have the East Central Vancouver Island project, which is kind of that area in green you can see on the map that's up here right now. And then there's one more, I think you can see it, but it's not part of the Strathcona Regional District, in Tree Farm License 44, Southern Vancouver Island. All right. So the Ministry of Forest mandate. So it's kind of how we prioritize our workload and where we kind of move our resources. So the mandate letter came out just a few months ago now, and it has a few kind of key areas for forestry management, one of which is the review of the timber sales program. So that's currently undergoing a 6-month review, and there's been a task team prepared to help work and create some. They're looking to provide more predictable and reliable access to fiber for BC timber sales, as well as strengthening, again, involvement with First Nations and communities, and obviously provide more jobs for contractors, workers in the communities. One of the other kind of key mandates in the Minister of Forest mandate letter was around forest landscape planning, which, like I mentioned earlier, we've got 2 fairly large projects going on in this area. There's been an initiative to support more value add and innovative forest products. So that's part of the BC Timber Sales has a new mandate to try and get some more timber sales that are affiliated with value-added manufacturers. So again, permitting and efficiency, sustainable harvest rates. So permitting is done mainly through the district here in Campbell River. That's the office that I manage. And we currently have a team of about 5 or 6 folks who are dedicated to reviewing permit applications as they come in. As well, we have a mandate for community forest program and, of course, softwood lumber negotiations. That's it. Yeah. Happy to answer any questions, or if anybody has any comments, we can take those back or respond now if that would make sense.
As soon as we get to the screen with everybody on there, do you have any questions? Okay, directors, any questions, please? Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. I have a question, maybe a couple. I know you mentioned a bunch of stuff there that around permitting. My understanding is that there's a significant challenge currently right now in terms of industry getting the permitting for what's already been designated as allowable cut. So I'm just wondering if this is just now the landscape where things do take longer. I know there's more people to consult with, and as you mentioned, reaching out to First Nations, but I'm just wondering with the discrepancy, what your expectation is in terms of managing to make that viable. I know when I hear from industry, and of course industry has its own mandate, but when I do hear from them, and I know that their concerns are around being able to plan out their activities and having that forward projection so that they can stay viable. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I think what you mentioned is accurate. What we're seeing in the Campbell River District is applications come through, but it's the pre-planning stage of getting to application that we're hearing from industry is, somewhat of a barrier as far as access to secure fiber and access to a land base where once the application comes in, it'll kind of go through the process. So as far as permitting goes, I think that permits are being turned around fairly quickly. Like I say, it's more of a kind of pre-planning and, while we work through some of these forest landscape planning projects and get a more, secure or reliable area where folks can go and make applications is kind of where we're at right now. Anything to add?
I think you covered that really well, Paula. And really that forest landscape planning process is about having conversations with nations, with industry, with the public around where and how forestry can happen on the land base. And that will help with that predictability and some of the challenges, Paula talked about the old growth strategic review and the temporary deferrals of old growth that were part of that TAP process. And that's definitely caused industry to have to, replan and avoid those areas. So the intent is that joint planning process under forest landscape planning will help establish old growth protections for the future if that's the result of the process, and provide more clarity on where and how forest harvesting can happen.
Any additional questions? Director Smythe?
Yeah, thanks. The minister promised that this year in 2025, there'll be 45 million cubic hectares of economically viable fiber. How are you going to achieve that?
That's a great question. From what we understand, in any case, in the Campbell River area, we have a very large amount of volume that's currently under tenure. So it's kind of what we call standing timber inventory. The issue of access to fiber, much of it is outside the control of the district. It could be based on economic viability, different decisions around license holders, and really it's kind of a lot of the application process is outside of the control, and what we can do is facilitate as best we can when the applications do come in. And there's no real answer to how we're going to support it other than what we've always done, which is, as applications come in, we try and facilitate and help as best we can to get those through as quickly as possible.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the response, but I mean, in 2024, we barely made 30 million cubic meters, right? And you're doing a 6-month review of BCTS. So that eats up into half the year. And so now you're going to do a higher volume in the second. We're struggling with it, right? And the industry's struggling in general. So we would really like to know how this is going to happen so the industry can ramp up to meet this. And because it badly is needed.
Director Davis?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a general comment regarding that. I know in the Tassos region where we are, things are ramping up quite a bit right now. I don't know if there has been a change, but it seems like permits are getting granted in this area. And then when I talked to some people in the logging industry in the Campbell River area, they reflected that as well. So I think things are changing. Having said that, I really wish the provincial government would speed things up in terms of the old growth strategy and just First Nations issues too, because it's obvious that people are hurting out there and things need to be ramped up a bit more. So anyway, that's my comment. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions that I have written out here, so bear with me for a moment here. So when will we expect a tangible outcome that will reduce the cost of operating in British Columbia?
Are you suggesting from the planning perspective, the cost of planning?
Correct.
Yeah, I think a lot of weight is being put on forest landscape planning and getting that certainty around what areas, are desirable to go log. I think that will go a long ways in reducing that uncertainty around, having to replan once, I know that when the old growth came out, some forest license holders had to go back and kind of re-engineer their blocks. And so as I think we move closer to forest landscape planning, I think we're going to have a lot more certainty on what areas can go or will be a viable area to go logging in, which ultimately should reduce costs as far as the planning side.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any additional questions?
I'd like to make a comment if I could.
Please.
Just in regards to that, in terms of if there is still this unknown around how this process is going to go, how long it's going to take, what the ultimate outcome is going to be. I think maybe messaging back to the chief forester that we maybe shouldn't be announcing an allowable cut that isn't going to be achieved in that period of time, so there isn't that discrepancy. Obviously, the better ideal would be have the permitting match the cut, right? What we're setting as a side, but. If there is this uncertainty built in from the front, that I understand this is complicated and there's lots of factors now that maybe weren't there, but it does seem like there's sort of two different messagings going forward. And in terms of other industry, we don't necessarily see the same delay in setting out. There's announcements that get made, and then there's a clear sort of direction for how to achieve those types of things. Forestry maybe struggles a little bit more with that. But there does seem to be this, just if as previous speaker said, right, if there's 30,000 cubic meters cut, and we're saying 45, and we're having a delay coming into the year because of an analysis process, it does seem that there would be some more consistent messaging and or perhaps something to go about accelerating the process, because I think we really do there's no doubt that logging has changed throughout the province, and certainly, we're in our area on the North Island, it is not the same industry it was, but it is still a very important part of our economic landscape, and we really need the companies that are there to have the certainty of knowing, not only do they then get to say, hey, this is what has been set by the province, here we go, but then apparently, it's not quite as achievable because of the permitting process. So it does seem like there's an inherent friction there that I can sort of commiserate with industry being quite frustrated. So and I sorry to be long-winded about it, but I think that maybe the province needs to solve its problem and either solve it from one side or change the numbers. So,
Any comment?
No, thank you for that. We'll definitely take that information back. Appreciate it.
Okay. Director Smythe?
Yeah, thanks. Well, seeing that this is, us just asking questions that you guys take to your hires up and then come back to us, I'll just jump on that theme. I know the projects that are happening around Tasses and Camel River. I know those projects well. Those projects have been years in the process, and now the permits are finally going through, and now they're finally doing it. If you look at what the province has been announcing, I mean, they're going to greenlight all sorts of mining projects, and I've worked in both industries extensively. Mining takes years and years to ramp up. They're hugely capital intensive. Forestry, on the other hand, is an industry that's been squeezed down over the last 5 years. And if the government was able to release it, it could ramp up instantaneously and give the entire province a boost. So this is a message that really has to go to the minister. They need to understand this. They're focusing on, I'm a great supporter of the mining industry. I think it's a super great industry, but it is a slow moving beast on top of the economics, right? Whereas forestry is ready to go. It's already been squeezed past. All you got to do is release it. So we really got to make that message.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Okay. Any other questions? No, we're over our time. I want to thank you ladies very much for coming out today.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it. Thank you. Okay. Can I get a motion to receive, please?
Motion to receive?
So moved.
Thank you. Second. Thank you. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Okay. We have Brian, the Executive Director, and Michelle, Manager of Communications of the Partnership Community, the BC Salmon Farming Association.
Thank you for having me today. Edith, can we have the slide deck? So just here to give an update on what's happening with the salmon farm transition and what the sector is doing. A few members may have seen this presentation already. We're trying to bring everybody on the North Island up just up what's sort of happening with the sector. So we're here to do that, and we have provided a backgrounder, recent copy of an economic report I'll be talking to, and links to the significant science review that we published last year. So no further questions. I'll just carry on. Yep,
Please.
thank you. All right. So as you are probably aware from media, in June of last year, the federal government made an announcement that said, essentially boiled down to within 5 years, the industry would need to transition to fully on land or in a closed containment system floating in the water. That closed containment has not been fully defined by the federal government yet, but you can imagine that as basically putting a aquarium in the water that had no contact with the marine environment. So that was not what the sector had been putting forward. We had been asking for what goalposts around the concern of potential impacts to wild salmon were, and we, as a sector, had proposed what we call a responsible plan that had a series of goalposts that we would hit over incremental goalposts of increasing our environmental sustainability. And as a industry sector, we had been saying, let industry figure out how to innovate and meet the goals and not push the sector to a certain technology. And the result was that we were ordered to go to a technology that is not well defined, and frankly, we are now 8 months into that decision, and we are still awaiting, and I'll talk about the process, awaiting some definition of exactly what that means. But I can just say that from a sector point of view, that was universally has been declared as irresponsible, unrealistic, unreasonable, and unachievable. And what that really means is that the transition as defined by the federal government as it currently sits will simply drive the investment out of British Columbia. And so the 4 companies that are farming Atlantic salmon and Chinook salmon right now in BC are evaluating their options and trying to find out, continue to get clarity on what the transition program means. And we have been in a consultation process since September with the federal government. Now with the proroguing of Parliament, that has died down a little bit, but we are waiting on a report. So the transition plan moved further consultation away from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to Department of Industry, Science and Economic Development, who have formed a task force. They have been meeting with municipalities, with the supply chain sector, with First Nations, and of course with the sector. That would eventually result in amendments to the Pacific Aquaculture Regulations as it stands now. At this point, we are still not aware of what the recommendations from that consultation would be. We as a sector have sent thousands of pages of documents and studies and explanations, but the long and the short of it is the provincial government with the federal government's own studies have said that to move to land would be a capital cost of about $2.2 billion. But more importantly, we simply don't have the power grid here on Vancouver Island to move 50,000 tons of salmon production onto land. And if the capital and the investment was available to do that, it would not happen here on Northern Vancouver Island. It would happen somewhere closer to where feed mills are, where the market is. The reason that the sector is here is because of the unique oceanography of the British Columbia coast and the rural areas. And so as the transition plan stands now, just to repeat, that we are very seriously worried that this will drive capital and the investment out. And I should already mention that since the 2019 Discovery Islands decision, we've already had over $1 billion in capital projects that were slated for North Vancouver Island be canceled. that money is still there if we can find a responsible plan, and we're still negotiating on that. So we have, as a sector, the companies, the First Nations that are working with the companies have made numerous trips to Ottawa, working with the Canadian Agriculture Industry Alliance, our national group, Canadian Federation of Agriculture, and the National Circle of Indigenous Agriculture and Food have been lobbying to come up with something responsible. In November, we had, and to back up, we had asked for an economic analysis from the federal government of what they believed that this would cost. That was not provided. So last fall, we hired an economist in Ottawa, and we presented a report that's been circulated. And that was actually launched by the First Nations, talking about what the impact was. We're also talking to the Prime Minister's office, the task force, the Premier, Minister Randy Neal, the new Walrus Minister, Minister Popham, the Ag Minister, and now starting meetings with Minister Gibson from the Jobs Economic Development. We've also been engaging as many other associations and community leaders and federal candidates and local government. We do not know what this new election is going to mean. As I said, Parliament being prorogued has slowed down. If we see an election called in March or April, the government will then go into caretaker mode, and the transition process will basically be stalled out. And that, as it stands now, will lead to more uncertainty in the sector. So I'll just say that it's not now 4 and 4 months deadline. It's that companies will probably make their decisions in 2025 whether they continue to stock farms. And you may have heard some press over the weekend about one of the companies, or on Friday, curtailing in Canada. I think it was either $60 or $80 million, reducing their capital investment while they evaluate what's happening. So capital flight is the biggest concern at this point. The industry has put forward solutions. We have, as you may know, multiple federal studies have determined that farmed salmon in British Columbia create less than minimal risk to wild salmon. That is the lowest level of which the federal government assesses risk. So it's basically, there's anything we do as humans in the environment has some risks. So there's always a certain amount of risk, but less than minimal risk is sort of the lowest bar in the federal system. So we know, as users of the marine environment, that we need to protect wild salmon, and we're committed to that. But we need to be able to, as a sector, the companies need to be able to have some investment certainty. So just to talk a little bit about this report, our economic analysis said that, and I should preface that a lot of the consultation that has been happening with First Nations and municipalities in the supply sector has been about compensation. If the sector moved to land, or if the sector decided to leave, what would the compensation be? And I think universally that they have heard that we are not looking for opportunities to pivot or to be bought out. But basically, the cost of getting rid of the sector will be over $9 billion in unnecessary costs to taxpayers. And here locally in British Columbia, that means losses of about $1.17 billion in economic activity, just over 400 million in GDP, and over 133 $1 million a year flowing into First Nation communities. And right now, even after the loss of 1,500 jobs in the sector, there is still another almost 4,600 jobs sort of on the line. And critically, and a lot of people don't talk about, especially with right now with what's happening with food pricing and the tariff threats, is the loss of another 50,000 tons of farm-raised protein here from British Columbia. So the potential impacts of the transition plan as they stand right now are very large, very real, and are creating a lot of anxiety through the sector, not just the companies, but also through the supply chain. And supply chain companies are very much at risk. So we, just talk a little bit about the responsible transition plan that we put forward and these, we put a plan forward that would continue to innovate, bring that $1 billion in capital back into British Columbia to continue to provide innovation. Ironically, since the Discovery Islands decision, there has not, investment in innovation has stalled here in British Columbia, but in Norway, where the company with larger investment is based, we are now about 6 or 7 years behind in innovation, and there's been a lot of new developments that are quite exciting that we would like to see come back to British Columbia. But under the responsible plan we put forward, and I think this is very important for North Island, is that we have identified that actually the sector could increase that over $1 billion in economic output to over $2.5 billion per year in output, almost $1 billion in GDP, and actually increase to about 9,000 jobs with over $560 million in wages annually. And then by 2040, the industry could actually be producing $4.2 billion in economic output in another decade. So those are sort of I think the binary choices that are facing the industry right now. We have the very real possibility that as the transition plan is determined now, that we will see capital leave Vancouver Island. And yet with a responsible plan, we could see this sector pivoting very quickly and actually to double the economic output of the industry and its positive impacts on Vancouver Island. That's shown here in these graphs. Over on the very far left is pre-transition, so pre the loss of the Discovery Islands. When we've between Discovery Islands and leaving the Broughton Archipelago, the industry has already reduced its production by 45%. That's what's over on the left. The financial losses of the Discovery Islands, and if we see a full ban, what those negative impacts are going to be in the middle. And then over on the far right side is what the various factors could be, what we would be doing for economic recovery and growth if our responsible plan was allowed to go through. So we have been acting in very good faith with the federal government. As I said, we've submitted thousands of documents. And we are hoping that we found lots of champions where we didn't expect to in Ottawa. We've had very good opportunities for dialogue and talk about that. And of course, as you know, the situation in British Columbia and Canada has changed somewhat. British Columbia with its largest operational deficit in the history of $9.5 billion, and Canada having a $60 billion deficit, and now the threat of tariffs and other economic damage to Canada and our natural resource base. We are arguing that this is not the time to get rid of a high-paying sector that has met all the standards of UNDRIP and agreements with First Nations, and is providing rural Canadian jobs and producing food. So we remain optimistic that as responsible stakeholders that logic will be seen and we'll be able to get back to a proposal that allows the industry to meet its environmental goals and continue to grow here on the island. But this will be a make or break year for the sector. We will continue as the sector to continue our community presence. We are working very much on talking about the positive things about the sector. You'll see us at the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance this year at the Association of Vancouver Island Communities, UBCM. We held a very successful community appreciation barbecue in the park here in Campbell River last year. I think we'd hoped for about 400 people, and I think we ran out of fish around 700 people. So we'll be increasing that again this year, and of course working with our young professionals group. So we continue to remain positive and working hard and trying to make sure that we continue to have our positive impacts in the communities. So I'll leave it at that. That's a very high-level overview. The background documents are there. We will also circulate on Thursday last week. The Macdonald-Laurier Institute actually published a fairly large report. They've been researching for about several months the farm salmon industry and published a very large policy report about the farm salmon sector here in British Columbia, and pointing out the fact that this is the federal government is doing this in British Columbia, but is not doing this in Atlantic Canada to the sector. So, with that, I'll just finish up. I mentioned our science review. So if you have any questions about the science, we've last year engaged a lot of external scientists and summarized all the science around the sector and made that in a readable form. And thank you. And I'll take any questions that you might have.
Okay, directors, do you have any questions? Director Davis.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for that presentation. It was definitely really informative and a bit sobering regarding the industry as a whole. Just speaking from experiences around here again in Tassus, I know Grieg has had some severe issues with their farms in the last little while where they've lost up to 100% of their stock due to sea lice outbreaks. Last summer, there was an algal bloom. So it doesn't, at least for our region, the economics don't really seem to be there for it based on these things. And I also have to say, as a mayor of the village of Tassus, we depend on wild salmon. Sport fishing is a mainstay of our community and provides a lot of our dollars. So we've always been at odds with what's been happening in this area. We also have 2 fish hatcheries which go by them, and they've had issues with the smolts being attacked by the sea lice from the fish farms. So we're kind of at the other end of this economically, but I guess my question is, it seems like the writing is on the wall with the government. Yes, the government could change and all that, but is the industry as a whole looking at pivoting in terms of the types of production, such as shellfish? Like we used to have a shellfish industry here. It was a family-run business. It's shut down now because they retired out, and there's been nothing come back to replace it. And this is something that doesn't seem to have any environmental downside. Same goes with seaweed production. And maybe the dollars aren't there, but I'd just like to know, is the industry interested in moving in these directions and essence adapting? Thanks.
Let me just first speak to the sea lice. I'd encourage you to read the chapter on sea lice in our modern science review, because we have summarized all the sea lice data for Nuka Sound during that time. And I think I don't want to speak for a company, but I can have them come back to you, and I'd be certainly happy to come up with Grieg representatives at Tassus and talk to you in detail about it. But the Grieg has not been losing 100% of their fish due to sea lice. Sea lice on this coast actually do not kill farm salmon, and Grieg has been. We respond to the risk that amplifications of the parasite in the farms could then flow back out to migrating smolts. And Grieg has met those requirements on that, but some of the innovations that they have been looking at doing, for example, one of the investments that was canceled was a post-smolt facility that would actually grow fish to 1 kilogram before they were introduced to seawater, which would mean they would miss a whole year of potential sea lice infection. Algae has been a challenge for Grieg, and they have had mortality out there in the last year as we see a changing climate. And there are innovations that Grieg wants to bring in to deal with that, but they have not lost 100% of their fish at any time. So, but I encourage you to read that. I should also mention, just for the people on the other Vancouver Island, where we have removed farms, and right now we'll be seeing these papers going to publication, but right now scientists are writing up 2 papers right now on, we have conducted a very significant biological experiment in the Broughton Archipelago and in the Discovery Islands, where we have now removed all the farms, but the industry continues to pay for consultants to monitor the sea lice on wild migrating salmon. And what we have seen is that in 2024, actually sea lice levels are as high or higher than they've been over a decade in both those areas. So when we remove salmon farms, sea lice levels did not disappear like people had said that they would. And that backs up modeling that was done by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in 2023 that looked at over 20 years of data and said they could not find a link between salmon farms and increased sea lice. So I'll park that, and I'm happy to come back on that anytime. In terms of diversification, right now, I actually spent a good part of my career, beginning of my career, in the shellfish industry. Right now, the shellfish industry in British Columbia is about $30 million a year, where it was over 20 years ago. The industry is very constrained by water quality regulations and paralitic shellfish monitoring and access to sites. It has never been a sector that has been able to attract a significant amount of capital. Whereas in the case of the farm salmon industry, we're doing $1 billion worth the output and have been British Columbia's largest agricultural export. While I think we all agree that we would like to see diversification, both into shellfish and seaweed and black cod, which has not received, in my mind, enough attention. The companies here are salmon farming companies, and so they are not looking to pivot to other forms of marine aquaculture. They are looking to farm salmon, and right now every other jurisdiction in the world is trying to get their investment dollars, and those investment dollars are global. And so if the industry leaves North Vancouver Island, it will go elsewhere in the world, and we will import that salmon. And just as an idea, since we've had the reductions since the Discovery Islands and Broughton reductions, we are now importing over $20 million US a month of farm salmon from the southern tip of Chile and from the northern end of Norway into Canada right now to make up for shortfalls in British Columbia, and that will be what will happen.
Could I just ask one other question? What about steelhead production? Because that seems to be a relatively recent industry that's building.
Yeah, so steelhead production, which is done on land and is still a smaller sector, has not really had significant viability, is really just rainbow trout moved into the ocean and then marketed as steelhead. So it's just trout farming is all that is, but it is done in the Great Lakes as open net culture, but here we have the Kutera facility, which relies on our facility to stay in operations, and we have one other steelhead producer, which is really a trout producer with an on-land trout producer that's a very small scale compared to what we do for salmon, and a lot of that is driven by what the market is.
Right. Thanks for that.
You're very welcome, and I'd be happy to come up and review any of the sea lice data with you, with the Grieg biologists anytime if you so want. Make that offer.
Yeah, I would be interested in that because it's good to have the actual raw information.
Directors, any additional questions? Director Schmidt.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And yeah, good presentation as always. You mentioned the company that was divesting out of Canada just announced this weekend. I did read the article, and it's going by memory, but I believe it was Greg, and it's $60 million, and they are actually directing that money to Norway.
Yeah.
Right? We're always hearing about the fact that Norway doesn't do fish farming, but in fact they do. And now because of us, they're doubling down on their investment up there because of policies in BC. I'm going to ask you, and I always forget the acronym for it, but there's a science lab here in Campbell River that does testing on, what's the acronym for it? And just one of you can explain to everybody here what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a not-for-profit research lab here in Campbell River that does diagnostics. They're called the Center for Aquatic Health Sciences. I think they've been around almost for a couple decades now. Supported by the industry in that they do fee-for-service work for the sector and do research. Right now, for example, the BC salmon farmers are supporting a graduate student that's looking at the genetics of sea lice and where resistance comes from in the sea lice, so that we can learn more about how best to improve, innovate treatment methods. And we're doing that as part of a national project. That group, I should tell you, is also looking to take a next step. And I would encourage you to ask the nations to come and talk. Right now, the chiefs of the Weewakai and Weewakam, and I think Dallas Smith from the Nanwakolis Council are now on the board of directors for that laboratory. I should also mention that that lab has a ISO accreditation, so International Standards Organization accreditation that is extremely difficult to get and to keep. Gives them an immense amount of credibility and independence. So that is a real asset and for Campbell River. And as not for profit, they're always, they're always looking to find more business. The nations have because of the decisive nature of the science around the sector. That's why we did our science review. We were challenged by the nations to put it all together. The First Nations have now got engaged on the board of that organization and are now looking to morph it into putting an I in front of that, as the Indigenous Center for Aquatic Health Sciences. I can't speak too much on their behalf, but I can tell you the intention is that the First Nations, as they get involved in more guardian programs here on the North Island and are caught in the middle of industry science and activist science, have expressed an interest to get involved in peer-reviewed independent science at the highest level. And right now they are shopping a proposal to actually make a significant addition to that lab going forward, and not just for the aquaculture sector, but environmental monitoring and marine stewardship in general. So that's an exciting project, and hopefully the industry will stick around long enough to provide some of that business certainty that they need for their diagnostics that support them right now.
Yeah, thanks. And I invite anybody that has the means to go actually check out that lab, because I had a chance to check it out. It's world class. Like, it's, and the level of professionalism, the qualifications of the people that are running the place is very impressive. And to me, even from an economic side, it's a neat spin-off industry from the industry, because I mean, we got PhD scientists working here in town because of being supported by the industry. So yeah, I recommend anybody to check that out.
And Director Smythe, one other thing that I think I should respond to is the question about Norway. So Norway, with less coast than we have, has over 1,000 salmon farms. And Norway's farm salmon is Norway's largest export after oil. And I think Jamie Gaskill at Poseidon Engineering, I think, coined this the best about our transition program. So in Norway, they have over 1,000 farms. They have way more companies. They have competitive innovation between the companies. They have a very strong research base where we just have like CAUSE that has competitive innovations. They have multiple universities innovating in the sector. They have lots of government support innovating in the sector. In Norway, they are working on closed containment. They are working on land. They're working on hybrid systems, which are like on land, but you flow the water through. They have not been able to make closed containment for full growth or land-based, using recirculating systems, work at scale yet. And the federal government's challenge to the industry, and I'm not going to say we're not up for challenges, would have the 59 sites and three Atlantic salmon farming companies here in British Columbia leapfrog what 1,000 farms and all the infrastructure and all the corporate backing behind it that Norway can't do in a period of 4.5 years. We have what we call a semi-closed system in Tofino. It took more than 6 years just to get its permit. You were talking about forestry permits earlier. The provincial government has said that they do not have the capacity to do all the tenure amendments that a closed containment would require. So it's not just about the fact that the investment certainty, that this would drive the investment certainty away. Even if we wanted to do it, it is a task that cannot be accomplished by even the provincial and federal governments themselves to support the licensing decisions. My personal opinion was that this decision was made to drive the industry out of British Columbia by giving us a solution that could not be actually physically accomplished. That is my personal opinion. That is not an official position of the salmon farmers. So
Did you say we have 59
we're now down to 59 sites.
as a comparison to 1,000 in Norway?
Yeah, in West Coast. Correct.
you.
Okay, do you have any resolutions for us? Do you have any asks?
Our ask is to encourage the provincial government, whenever possible and in whatever means possible, to support this sector. And I'll say the same thing to you that in our last meeting with David Eby, is that when we were talking to our colleagues in Atlantic Canada about why the federal government is not trying to do this in maritime provinces, the most common answer we have is because the premiers would never allow it. Because the economic development that it's doing, the stability it's bringing to fishing communities. And as an example of that, 2 days after our announcement last June, New Brunswick issued a press release trying to bring all the investment that was going to leave BC to New Brunswick. So those are the kind of things we would do. And I should actually mention a couple of things. Another thing, just of Sean's, Director Smythe's mention. When we look at the companies here on the North Island, and we've asked them to look into their vendor lists. The sector right now is supporting 1,400 vendors on Vancouver Island. Campbell River alone, we move about $340 million a year through the economy here. Those supply chain impacts are actually going to be are some of the ones that sort of keep me up at night, that we could see in the sector. Is that, and I'll give you a good example of that, what's been happening. So just down the street, like literally half block down the street, we have Nord Marine, which supplies contract vessels, very highly specialized crane vessels. So if you're working on doing crane work around a farm, you have to have guys who are both certified skippers, certified deckhands, and also trained in the use of cranes and all everything that goes with that. Each of those vessels has 2 full-time crews. This year, they had to ship about 4 vessels in total, worth about $100 million back to Norway, because the decrease in work that they had for them at our decrease. Those ships ended up in Norway, were then immediately sold to Atlantic Canada. And so those impacts are happening, and they're real, quite real. We were having layoffs right, left and center in the sector already, and we're also, Director Smythe spoke about the quality of PhDs here at ICAUS. One of the issues that we're having is we have a very talented workforce, and we are now having a significant brain drain because they are being recruited to other jurisdictions, and not only are they leaving Vancouver Island, in some cases they're leaving Canada because they're so valuable in this sector globally right now. So, yeah.
So again, the ask is,
Please ask the Premier and his government to support this sector.
go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, because it was on that theme, and that was actually one of the questions I had here, is that have you had, because I believe the former premier put out a letter of support to the aquaculture industry. Have you had a letter of support from this current standing premier?
Yeah, we had a very strong letter of support from Premier Horgan. We've had a letter of support from Premier Eby asking that, that was in 2024, asking that, there was compensation if the industry, if there was further decreases to the industry. compensation, I don't think is something that any of these communities want, because, you know, one-time compensation. We are now in a very different place for the provincial government. In the next few weeks, we'll be meeting with the relevant ministers. I had a discussion with the Premier in Prince George a couple of months ago, and you know, asking for his support. I think they are starting to see that, you know, that they need to provide more support, but any nudging that they can do to make sure to reach out to the federal government and make sure that the federal government allows this industry to continue in a responsible fashion is what the industry needs.
Thanks. So with that, unless there's any more questions, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay. First, we'll receive the report for information.
So moved?
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And so the city of Cam River put out a letter of support to the aquaculture industry. I'd like for us to do something similar, to put out a letter of support to the industry, to both the BC and the federal government.
Okay, do we have a second? Director Summers. Thank you. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your support.
Thank you very much for coming out today.
Okay, thank you very much. Please call me anytime, and if any of you individually have questions, please contact the Salmon Farmers Association anytime. Thank you.
Director Baker, I was wondering if I can make a motion connected to the forestry meeting we had earlier.
Certainly.
Yeah, because I think it was really nice for these people to come out and talk to us and everything, but I think it's important that we meet with the chief forester. So if we could put out a letter asking to actually meet with the chief forester and discuss our issues instead of a delegate.
Chairman, we do have still on the agenda under correspondence.
Okay. Go ahead, Director Davis.
Yeah, I just have a question. I'm just on my phone here and I can't see all the attendees. I'm just wondering how many elected representatives we have at this meeting today.
Physically, 2. But there's folks online, Martin.
Oh, yeah, well, how
1,
many in?
2, 4, 5, including yourself online, 2 physically here.
Okay, thanks.
Director Summers, you had your hand up? Sorry, you're muted.
Do you need a seconder for that motion?
In a minute.
Okay.
Okay, we'll do that after. First, we're going to go through a couple other things first here. That the document entitled BC Salmon Farmers Section Overview be received.
Second?
Thank you. Sorry, Director Podich, did you have something to add? No? Thank you. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. And the document entitled Draft Transition Plan for BC Farmers be received. Thank you. Second? Okay, many hands went up at that point. There's Director Horry. Okay. and that the document entitled BC Salmon Farmers Modern Salmon Farming in BC be reviewed. Be received, sorry. Okay, Director Summers. Thank you. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Okay, adoption of the regular minutes of the natural resource held on November 27th, 2024 be adopted.
So moved.
Thank you. Second? Thank you. Director Harvey. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Business arising, none. And that the report from the CEO of the Strathcona Regional District be received. Do I have a motion, please? Thank you. Director Bowditch. Just second. Thank you. Director Andrew. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Okay. Allowable annual cut. That the report from the CAO be received. Thank you. Second. Thank you. Director Summers. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Director Smythe.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we ask for a meeting with the Chief Forester to address our concerns with the forestry industry and the annual allowable cut.
Thank you. Do I have a second? There we go. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Correspondence, none. New business, none. Termination, that the February 24th, 2025 meeting of the Natural Resource Committee be terminated.
Move termination.
Do I have a second? Director Henry, thank you. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Thank you, everybody, for turning up. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll see you all soon.